Is it not 130?
Okay, well, it is 1:30 on Wednesday, August 9th, and I will call the City of Lacey Lodging Tax Advisory Committee meeting to order. First up, we have a roll call. So if you don't mind, and you would just introduce yourself, and we'll start over here.
Hi, I'm Andrew, and what else? My favorite food is sushi.
And you represent?
I represent the Weekend Inn.
Okay.
Thank you. Ruth Weigelt, Lacey Spring Fun Fair.
Troy Finance Director, could do committee, sorry.
Sadie Sidlin, I'm the management analyst helping with the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee.
And online?
We have Chad Carpenter with the Washington Center for the Performing Arts.
And my name is Malcolm Miller with the City of Lacey, and we have
Rick Walk, City Manager.
and
Shannon.
Jenny Kelly Fong, Assistant City Manager for the City of Lacey.
okay. So next up, we have public comment. Is there anyone wishing to address this committee who is not here as part of this committee? Seeing none. Next, we'll have our approval of the agenda and our previous meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to approve our agenda?
I'll make the motion. So moved.
Second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and next, we will need a motion to approve the September 10th, 2022 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we have an agenda and we have approved minutes from our previous meeting. Next on our agenda are our business items, and I'm going to turn over to City Manager Rick Walk for a brief introduction.
Well, thank you, Chair, and welcome everybody. I just wanted to do a quick introduction, and I know typically in the past years we would start the LTAC meetings a couple of weeks previous to today. However, with the transitions we've had with the switch over in the city management with the departure of Scott and the transition the interim role into this, we kind of got a little bit behind in getting the original meeting scheduled. So I do appreciate everybody's patience and for us to get this meeting set up today. And as we'll go over today, the overall schedule is not going to be compromised. We're just getting a little bit later start in the initial conversation. Also in this transition, we wanted to try to set up this year's review with some formal policies and structure for application review. And so that's some of the things we're going to be focusing on going over today. Shannon and Sadie have been working to pull together some of these draft policies and also an upcoming schedule that Sadie will go over a little bit later in the agenda. And then of course, we'll kick off with Troy providing the financial update for the LTAC fund for this year and what we may have for allocation. So ultimately, after their Troy's presentation and Sadie's presentation, there'll be opportunity for the LTAC committee to provide input and feedback and ultimately hopefully have at the end of the day some agreed upon policies and processes going into this year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Troy to provide the financial update.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Kind of my screen for you. It's pretty much the same worksheet we've used for at least as long as I've been here, so 15 years or so. Some things never change. A little bit bigger.
Thank you.
So maybe I'll start with what happened in 2022. It's always good to know what our last full financial year has been closed, has been audited. So these are rock solid numbers for you. So in 2022, we collected $546,741 in lodging tax. I believe that's the highest in history. So you think about the recovery and coming out of the COVID restrictions, we've certainly overcome that and then some. In terms of interest earnings in 2022, that's showing a minus almost $27,000. Of course, that makes no sense whatsoever, but
What that is, there's an accounting standard in which every year we have to adjust our investments according to market value. And about $37,000 worth of market adjustment in the negative direction impacted our interest income. So obviously we did earn interest. We didn't lose money on any of our investments. But that does get reported on our financial statements. And the reason it is a negative market adjustment is because we had an historic rise of interest rates for about an 18-month period. As you know, the Federal Reserve has increased rates from 0 clear up to like 5.5 today. So a very, very fast increased interest rates, which means we're holding on to investments at lower rates. And if we were to go to market and sell those, we would have to take a loss. We have no plans to do that. At least in my time, and we've never sold an investment before maturity. So we've never taken a loss. Don't anticipate that either. But per the accounting standards, we do have to adjust for that market loss, even though no intention of having that be realized. So certainly don't want any alarm from anyone. So looking at expenditures, of course, this committee advised the council as to what awards were out there. Various, entities, had their festivals as they started to come back in 2022. So a pretty normal year in terms of festivals and activity in terms of expenditures of lodging tax dollars. So we spent a total of $563,399. We did actually use about $6,000 in cash. We had budgeted to use $174,000, but because of the higher level of lodging tax that came in, we didn't have to use that same level of reserves, but we did use a little bit. In terms of 2023 year to date, as of July 31st, we've collected about $205,000 in lodging tax. Something to point out there is the first 2 months of the year are actually taxes that were generated on activity from the 2 previous months, so November, December of 2022. So we actually adjusted those back to 2022. So this number actually only represents 5 months worth of collections, not 7 as it may appear. So we're actually on track to meet our projections. If you look at kind of the month-to-month, year-to-date comparison to 2022, we're about $6,000 lower than we were last year. So again, we had $546,000 in total collections 22. So year-to-date, we're somewhere in that 530 to 540 range in terms of what we could expect for the year-end 2023.
So it'll be a little over budget.
A little over budget, but
Yeah.
less than 2022.
Right.
So I'm glad the committee was in agreement to budget conservatively rather than kind of based on what we saw in 2022's recovery. Year to date, we've earned about $17,000 in interest income. We'll probably have just as a crystal ball type look into the future for 23. I'm gonna guess we're gonna have that same negative adjustment in market value, but we are indeed collecting positive revenues and income for interest. No surprises in terms of expenditures, very much like 22 coming in as expected and as awarded. So, quite a long list of festivals and activities that this funding source supports.
Can you go back up real quick?
Of course.
So all the way up, I guess there. So the 52 is just a representation of, that's just year to date.
Correct.
And they'll make their all the way to 70 most likely.
Right. So some of these are timing issues for sure. So these agencies typically get paid quarterly. So, Washington Center, for example, we just haven't made that payment on the second quarter, but yeah, fully expect to spend the full 30,000.
So does Chamber always, and I think that maybe we're only halfway through the year, basically, but they've already taken 52,500 in expenses versus our 70.
Sure. So that's.
Is that typical? them?
I'm not familiar with the timing of the actual payments, but that's 3 quarters worth, so we shouldn't expect any more expenditures through September as an example,
They
so.
invoice quarterly with also their metrics, reporting metrics. And so depending on when this was taken, it could have been for
okay.
next quarter.
It just seemed like, oh, we're only a little over halfway through the year. and-
Sure, yeah, it's just a timing. I
Yeah,
mean, July
okay.
technically is 3 quarter, so,
Okay,
but we have contracts with all these agencies
Right.
and these partners, so. These are contracted amounts, so we definitely make sure that we don't exceed those. In terms of year-to-date, we've made our annual transfers to, as an example, the support to the RAC. $180,000, so that's a full year's worth of support that's reflected in these numbers, so. When you look at the total expenditures for the lodging tax, it's 450,000 and some change. Of course, that exceeds what we've collected in revenues, but that's very normal. I mean, it's just a timing difference. And if you think about when festivals take place, they tend to take place in the summer. Where we'll be collecting lodging tax through next February for 2023. So it's just a little bit of a lag in timing issue in terms of that goes.
But also we haven't expended the full 22.
Correct. And again, this is a little bit bigger year, 2023. We have the one-time capital support for the Washington Center of 250,000 that we haven't expended yet. So I think we're going to be really close to what we actually budgeted in terms of expenditures. That also goes for the use of beginning cash. 353,000. That 250,000 our capital investment is going to be a large part of that. So we'll definitely start using beginning or fund balance to support this year's expenditures. Just an early preview in terms of 2024. Of course, you haven't even started to accept applications or any sort of deliberations on what might be awarded, but the revenue projections at this point are 540,000 for lodging tax. And I need to take another look at interest income. Obviously, I have in the projections just over 20,000, and year to date, we've already collected 17,000. So need to do a little closer look and see what we think interest rates may be next year. Of course, that's a moving target. Seems like every other day for me, but I think that will go, slightly higher by time you actually start looking at applications and start to make your considerations. Any questions on the financial part in the budget before I look at fund balance? This committee typically looks at fund balance. You have an idea of what might be possible before you go into your grant application discussions.
I don't have anybody else.
Okay, let's look at fund balance real quick. So we ended 2022 with a fund balance of about $1.14 million. In terms of what commitments of that balance, we of course have the use of cash in this year's adopted budget of $353,000. This committee or this in the past, this committee has designated $50,000 for wayfinding signs for a future project, as well as $500,000 for synthetic turf replacement at the RAC. And then we did establish a number of years ago, just a kind of I don't want to call it an emergency reserve, but I didn't know what else to call it. So a 2-month operating reserve, which is just 1/6 of all the annual expenditures. Just in case, we have things that may come up mid-year, that type of thing, and just gives this committee a little bit of a cushion. So commitments of just over $1 million in terms of projected cash that would be available for award, as an example, is just over $126,000.
I've been seeing the synthetic field replacement dollars just kind of roll over. Is there a projected time that we're going to be using those, or when that's going to happen?
It will. Trying to think of the schedule. So we have several different fields, and we staggered we've actually already replaced all the synthetic field once already. We expected to get, the original field, we thought we would get 15 years life out of the fields. We only got 10. So we funded that replacement out of general fund reserves.
Oh,
So we finished that probably 6 or 7 years ago. So we're probably, 8, 9 years away from the starting that cycle, replacing those fields. We do a lot of maintenance and repair. We bought lots of equipment in terms of upkeep on the field. So, fingers crossed, we'll get a full 15 years out of that first replacement, but it's gonna be here before we know it. I have a feeling, so.
Well, I guess it continues to add to our interest balance, right?
It does.
So the wayfinding signs too, those have been there for a while, right?
They have, boy, I may phone a friend, I'm trying to think of when we put those first ones up.
About
It's been a long.
2019 is when we first put them up.
Hmm,
And
we have more to go.
there is a potential for more, but there's not anything particularly planned or programmed. And but there's also, again, the ongoing maintenance as well of those signs.
Yeah. Okay,
So half our reserves are static and stationary and haven't really gone anywhere for quite some time. And we're probably not looking to expend them in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay.
Decided to $500,000 number for this that it shows, like who decided that lodging cash dollars was gonna be 100% supporting or basically replacing the field.
Yeah, that was a past lodging tax committee discussion. There are in total about $1.7 million in reserves. So think about other city funds. We have funds designated kind of throughout the different funding sources for the city. So there was a legislative change in 2013 in terms of how lodging tax could be used. It was right around that period, and we had an accounting standard that talked about how we would report reserves and how we designate. So it was right in that time frame, probably 10 years ago, that we started to have that discussion about reserves. If I recall, the discussion was really, it revolved around an acknowledgement that the RAC is the biggest tourist facility in Lacey, and therefore, those investments were like there. Also discussion about this is a one-time source of funds, that once those reserves are depleted, there's nothing there to replace it. So Lacey has a long practice of matching reserves with one-time types of projects rather than ongoing operations. So I think those were the kind of two main factors at the time.
That's fair.
All right, well, next up on our agenda, we have the LTAC policy procedures and 2024 funding priorities review. City, your last name is pronounced Siglin?
Siglin, yes.
Siglin. Just didn't want to screw it up.
Very good. Hopefully I can figure out the navigation. So again, my name's Sadie Siglin. I'm the management analyst who's been helping with the lodging tax. And so recently,
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
You're not sharing the screen for those who are virtual.
oh, thank you. Maybe actually click share. Thank you. So the city recently conducted an analysis of other cities and how they're operating their lodging tax committees, how they're delegating their funds and running their entire program and the types of policies they have. So I am here today to kind of review these findings with you and make some recommendations that I think would be valuable to the City of Lacey's Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. So the first thing that we looked at is the lodging tax funding application process. And that is for the application for events, activities, and program that we provide grant funding to. And what I found was that almost all cities did everything online, if not only online. The City of Lacey is currently still doing paper submissions, which includes submitting those packets with copies of your marketing materials and everything included with that application. My considerations in these recommendations would be that switching to an online application could streamline the application process for our event applicants. We could still make these questions available in advance so individuals could prepare their application materials ahead of time. And we could still have the option to provide paper applications upon request. So if somebody didn't have access to a computer timely, we could absolutely make accommodations for that. A nice benefit of doing an online application system would also be the simplifying of the JLARC reporting that the city does every year to follow up on this. So my recommendation for online applications would be to do online applications for the city of Lacey and then have that paper application as an option, but really default to having everything streamlined online and simplifying that process.
So did I read that no mail-in? Did I read that somewhere?
Yeah, and we can
So, and that's good because I think we've had a problem with that in the past.
absolutely, and
Yeah.
that's part of the draft procedures that we'll get to is really outlining what are the cutoff dates with these applications. If you did require an in-person paper application, what the rules around that would be. So the recommendation for event grant funding applications would be to default to that online system with a paper system in the background. As Ruth mentioned, one of those recommendations would also be to really enforce those cutoff dates. If you're sending in a paper application, that has to be here. It can't be postmarked or sent ahead of time. And they have to be received in person. We wouldn't even do a mailed application potentially.
Good.
The other thing that I looked at and found when I was researching with other cities was how they kind of chose which applications to use and which events to give funding to. And what I found was that a few cities are using a scoring rubric. And what they're using that for is to kind of identify if the events actually meet the criteria for lodging tax funding and how strongly they score as being a likely event that we could support as a city. This is an example of the city of Kirkland scoring criteria. Can everyone see that? Okay, it's kind of small.
No.
And the answer is no here. Okay.
Zoom in a little. So this is an example that they had posted online, just of the different types of things they give scores to. What I found was that these scores correlated with questions on their application as well. So they would award points to events based on the criteria in the scoring rubric, and then during their selection process, use the rubric information to determine who they felt were the highest quality events to fund and who maybe didn't meet the criteria or would not bring in the most tourism to their city. So this is an example you can see. They also use some bonus points for things like new events, having shoulder season events, and then they have some specific locations that they also gave additional points to. So that's just kind of one example of what the scoring rubric looks like and how it's being used. So some considerations with scoring would be that it would improve consistency. We would essentially have that option for documentation to go back and view how scores are used. It creates data for future consideration. If at any point the lodging tax committee wanted to review how did we score events, how did we award points, and how many actually received funding, that data would be available through tracking. And then it also allows the board time to review the applications independently. Talking with Lakewood, they do something where they all review the applications and then come to their meetings with the application scored so that they can discuss their scores and adjust overall, which they said was a huge time savings for them.
So everybody does it separately and then we come back and have a consensus on a score.
Yeah, that's kind of
Is
the
that what
model
you're
that
saying?
other
Yeah.
cities
Okay.
have used, is that they have done independent scoring. And some cities do the scoring all together. It's just an option of how you use it. I've talked to multiple cities and they scored and used the scores completely differently.
Yeah.
So it's really just a tool for them to have for tracking and consistency. My recommendation for Lacey would be to implement the scoring rubric to help increase consistency and be able to track and see what we're using our money on, and also be able to note that all of these events meet the requirements to actually receive funding. Are they truly for marketing and increasing tourism?
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. So who would be scoring? We will?
You, the board, yes, would use these scoring criteria, which were attached in this packet as well, if you wanted to see another copy. So you would use that going through each application and looking at the questions on the application to say, how do they bring tourism into the city of Lacey? And say an event says it's a multiple.
I just
Yeah.
didn't understand, like, okay, so do we all take a packet home, we score, we come back and we discuss it?
Yes, so depending on the application model that we use, it could be provided digitally or via paper for the board to review each application. The questions on the applications do correspond with this rubric as well. So each criteria on the rubric has a question that goes with it and says this question is worth 10 points, for example. So when you as a reviewer can easily translate between the two.
And then also too, when you bring it back to the common meeting, then you'll have the scoring system. You can kind of still have a conversation point or debate point. And in fact, there's a score that's, there's a broad range.
Sure.
Then you can kind of work out, well, what each member of the committee looked at that and how they weighed it and the perspective, and come to a consensus after that.
So before we get too far into the second recommendation, is there a third?
There are a few, yes.
Okay, so I didn't want to. I kind of wanted to talk about the online, potential launch for that,
Okay.
and kind of take a deeper dive there a little bit
Absolutely, let's
before we
do
get too far into the second and third recommendation.
that.
So if we say no mail-in at all, and we do that like this year or what, are we suggesting that we kind of have a year where, hey, this is our final mail-in year, so that everybody's aware and understands that the following year there is no mail-in? Or are we trying to suggest that we just cut them off immediately so that they don't have like any real warning? Because up until now, we've allowed for mail-in, and yes, we've had some circumstances with the mail-in that kind of caused us some grief. But at the same time, I don't know that it's that we want to just cut that part of our program without allowing people, telling them and giving them enough warning, because I can imagine that there are people who have been doing this for 5 or 10 years who are expecting to do what they've done over the past 5 or 10 years. And if we just cut them off, then maybe they won't get their chance. So I guess what I'm suggesting is, or asking first, is what is our online launch plan, and how do we transition in a way that everybody still gets to, kind of get their chance.
Absolutely, and that's a really great point, because especially looking at the timeline that you guys will see, we do have a slightly shorter application window this year with the delays. I have the online application that I could show you how that looks. Would you like to see that?
Yeah, that's fine. And I'm all for opening up the online application, because I know that there are so many people who would much rather, less paper, and but I don't know if I'm all 100% for shutting down the other options immediately, without, warning or letting people know our intent and our plan.
Absolutely. And I think, the nice thing is that we have the flexibility that we could do a combination. We could absolutely start with online and still allow mail-in, letting people know in the future we will be transitioning, or this is the last year, or whatever you decide. There is the ability to do both simultaneously. So we can do this online option for those who are ready for it, and those who are not, we can keep the paper option until we're able to kind of create a cutoff date, give them notice, especially with the shorter timeline this year. Some people may not be prepared to go fully digital. That's an excellent point.
Great.
So there is a lot of flexibility with the online option, which is really nice, is that we can run this feature and still have a paper copy. This can all be transitioned into a paper
So we
copy.
just run it like you suggested this year, we'll do digital and paper, hard copy. And then maybe even have like a little questionnaire on it. Are you prepared to go digital versus, holding, your paperwork like you did in the past? So maybe this year could be, or next year could be a trial period.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can
And
make
we-
sure we add a postmark date that has to be postmarked by a certain date to be
Right.
accepted.
Yes.
That's the challenge with the mail is you have that delay.
Any tracking number or something.
Yeah.
that Delay in process because, as we're moving into the review stage, the mail may be, 2 or 3 or 4 days behind that final review date. So we just want to make sure we have.
Yeah.
Because we also have in the past looked over the application and tweaked it sometimes. and
Yes.
stuff. So we're probably not quite prepared. I didn't have it in my packet, did I?
We wanted to get better
No, the
metrics.
draft.
Yeah.
No, so this is what the online will look like. And let me just,
Oh, okay.
well, it won't let me zoom. I apologize. This is what it would look like. It's set up very similar to the same style as other cities. We could absolutely put an option in here that says coming 2025 online only, any language like that. So it just goes through all of the same questions that are on the current paper application have all just been transitioned into a digital version. They'll select what types of activities they're doing and fill in all of the information. This is where you see the questions having that points correlation with the scoring rubric also. So it'll let you know this is the tourism issue, and we can weight this up to 20 points. So that's translated on this online application. And they just would fill in everything like they would on that paper application, fill in the number of overnight stays, if they have any reservations made ahead of time, anything that we possibly have asked for, we can ask for on here. And at the very end, they would just do a file upload of their digital materials. So currently, I know we ask for like 6 paper copies of each so that the board has time to review that. With this, they would be able to just upload 1 copy of all required materials, and we would receive that digitally and be able to send that out. So a very simple, just like the paper application, we've got the listed documents that are required. And then they still have their certification of accuracy and public record notice like they do on their other applications. But this is something that we can turn off and on at any time. We can make any sort of edits, put any additional language on there about any changes upcoming too. So this is a very, very flexible application in terms of what we can put on there and how we can use it. So that is what that would look like. Does anyone have?
That's pretty easy. Yeah, no, it's good.
I like the idea of, I definitely like the idea of doing an online copy. In my world, I've heard a lot of people say this is a lot of paper. And, when are you guys going to get into the next century? So it feels good to have the option to do this electronically and to upload marketing materials and so forth, items like that. I also agree with Malcolm that we need to, for some people that we don't want to create that non-equitable standpoint where they're not ready or they have to go the old route because they don't have access to the technology or whatever their reasons are. So I think being able to accept both of that this year, I think is really important. And I think that's something we should definitely consider.
Any more questions about the application piece?
So as far as direction from this committee, are we in agreement that that we'll have a 1-year transition from paper to digital to both for 1 year, and then we'll make sure that we notify people that, in subsequent years, we will be doing online only? I think that's fair.
I think it's fair.
Big and bold and so they can't miss it.
Also wishing that they feel like, we continue to acknowledge that, like you're acknowledged that next year it's gonna be this
Yeah.
way. Versus it just being written on the side, because no one ever
Right.
gets that. You see City of Lacy, okay. move on.
Right, and subsequent next year, go, I didn't know, I didn't see it.
That's exactly right.
Something like that would be really cool, but I don't know the logistics and making.
That would be an option at the bottom to put in essentially another checkbox if that's what you would
Yeah.
like to see.
Just to acknowledge that, hey, we've made a transition. Are you transitioning with us?
Right. You definitely don't want anybody left out.
Absolutely.
Last year we had one that came in the day after, something along those lines, and we kind of had this discussion and stressed each other out about should it be in or should it be out, you know.
We want to try to avoid some of those. If it's not in by that date, then it would not meet this funding cycle. But with the mail-in, we have to make sure it references a post mark date of when it'll be accepted, so.
And typically, how are we getting the word out in terms of, so I know a lot of the repeat users know the cycle and understand where to grab their information, but for those people who have yet to come for funding, our marketing for this program is done how?
As far as I know, on our website, it's up. I'm not sure if we've done anything further than that. Rick, I don't know if you know. Social media.
Okay.
Okay, so continuing probably the same as we have done before, updating it on our website and the use of social media.
All right, well, maybe we can have a deeper conversation in the future about how to, give access to more people or notify more people or better promote. But at the same time, we're expending nearly every dollar, so it's
Yeah.
not as if we need to be shouting this from the top of the building, hey, there's funding over here.
It could make a more competitive process.
Yeah.
And looking at tourism oriented events, those type of things are really coming, draw people into this community. And say we'll get this later in a report about future schedules, but there could be an opportunity mid-year to look at wrapping up for next season. What do we need to do to prepare and get the information out, and how do we utilize those funds?
Okay, so I think is that the kind of direction you were looking for on this?
Yeah,
Can we move on to the scoring rubric?
Yeah.
And talk about that a little bit. Can you bring that? Yeah, let's take a look. And it's kind of small font, so maybe we have to look at one side first and then the other side.
This is the Kirkland example, but there's attachment in there that has the recommended scoring rubric for this committee to consider.
Okay,
So table C or B?
that would be table B. So here we have both a scoring rubric and a criteria card. So it really breaks down in order to get your 10 points, what criteria do you have to meet? So the criteria is table C. Table B is the funding application scoring. So you can see each category is given a certain weight of points overall. And then through the criteria scoring, you see what do you have to do to get those full points. Some are super simple. It's either, are you a new event or not? So that is in there. And let me see really quickly, Chad, if I can get this pulled up. So sorry about that. So sorry about that, Chad. Are
You're
you-
okay. Yeah, you're okay. You're okay. I'm sorry I wasn't there in person.
Oh, no, so sorry. I had some technical issues myself logging in today, so I don't have my normal access. But let's see if I can get you a copy that you can all view together.
Go to the meeting overview, top left. tab.
Thank you.
There you go.
How's that, Chad?
Yay.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. So we have the scorecard itself, which really just outlines what the category is, the total point weight, and then I've also outlined the corresponding application question as I kind of went over in the online application. So each question is geared to extract this information to what we need. So these are all of the categories that we had come up with. And these are subject to change. This is just based on what other cities were doing and how they were using their scoring in correlation with the questions we're already asking. So there is flexibility in this. And then when you go down to the rubric criteria, this is really where you see kind of the breakout of how the points should be allotted. So if you're a new event, have you existed for 4 years or longer? Yes or no? You either are awarded the 10 points or you're not. Other questions that have a little more complexity have multiple options, such as tourist attraction. Does the event have the ability to attract visitors from greater than 50 miles or more, which is our goal? So you can have a category who potentially they could only attract City of Lacey residents. So that event may not score as well on this rubric because it's not reaching those visitors from 50 miles or greater. Then you could do visitors from surrounding areas, which is still really good, but not quite meeting that 50-mile mark. And then
So is what I'm, can I ask a question?
absolutely.
So they can either get 0 or 10 or 20, nothing in between, right?
And the way this is
Yeah,
set up,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, no,
So, and then those 20-point questions typically are a little more complex. So
Right.
there's 3-point options, but yes, you would either award one of these based on their application. So that is the way that I set up the scoring rubric, is just to be clear and concise with the questions that we're currently asking for on our application, to help indicate maybe if that event's actually going to draw in tourists from 50 miles or greater, which is our primary goal to increase tourism for Lacey.
So if they're a new event, how will we know if they're safe and inclusive?
The questions on the application, there is a question specifically on the application that asks about safe, inclusive, and welcoming events. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so up here you'll see the corresponding question is 3. So on that application, question 3 asks, can you explain to us how your safe, welcoming, and inclusive event in alignment with Lacey's goals? So those are really well laid out on the application to have that clear. This is the criteria you're trying to meet. And then you would be able to look back and forth. The nice thing about these scores too is they can be used whichever is the best for the committee. You could use these scores to make final determinations on applications. You could use them to determine maybe who you might want to provide a supplemental presentation to, everything like that. So they're very flexible.
And is the suggestion that if we were to implement something like this, that we do it immediately? Is that what we're suggesting here? Or are we suggesting that we take a look at this and review it so that we get like implement it sometime in the future?
If you wanted to look at it more, we could do it further in the future, or we could implement it immediately and kind of use it this year to test how it would work out. The nice thing, like I said, it's very flexible. So you could use it and then elect not to use those scores for any decision making and just get a feel for it. Or if you decide that that's something that wouldn't be helpful, then we could bench that and look at it in the future date, whichever you feel is most helpful. It's really designed to be a tool to help the application process be easier and more consistent and transparent also for the applicants. So
I kind of would like to see how some of our regulars, I'll say it that way, would score in this circumstance, in this situation, using this rubric. You know,
Because it'd be a lot easier with their past events because we actually have a lot of history and we can have a better feel, but I think it'd be a little more geared to them versus a new event, you know what I mean? As a brand, and we don't know anything about them, we just have based on what they've answered for via this rubric here, so. I see the benefit in this as well. I also see like, okay, might be a little bit of challenge at the same time. It's almost like a credit score. You know, you don't have credit with the city of Lacey, doesn't have much with us, you know? Real quick question as well, other counties, do they have more questions than this, or is this pretty standard?
You know, some had more, some had less. I found that some cities awarded bonus points, as they would call them. So new events, as an example, was a bonus point for some cities. Overall, it's the same score. You either get the points or you don't. So I elected not to prepare it that way, just for ease, but this is pretty consistent with what other cities did, with the exception of bonus points or not.
See, some of those, on your question one here, will get 0 points because they've been around forever. And then, yeah, so I think it's good. I think this is good. And then the shoulder season too, that's another interesting one that some are not gonna, but I think we need to go with something like this to start, at least to test it and find out what we like about it and what we don't. And because there's a few here that I always questioned, is this location, you know, which would really help us, I think.
Right, I wrote down that it should be with more points.
Oh, okay,
And this part of the feedback we want
yeah,
to hear, are the
Absolutely.
weighting right, or do you want to emphasize other things more than
Right, I think we should just tweak this to what we think is the best and then just run it, see what happens.
Yeah,
Because we never
yeah.
know until we try.
right,
You know, last year, and you might be getting this later in your next presentation, last year we discussed the possibility of setting aside maybe 10% for and designating that for like brand new, never have been before this committee to ask for dollars yet. And in this case, it shows that, you know, hey, we're giving extra points for it. But I don't think we ever really finished that discussion from last year about the possibility that maybe we would set aside 10% for brand new newcomers. If it doesn't get used, and we fold it back in and use it and disperse it amongst the rest. So I didn't know if we're headed in that direction.
I do have some funding priority options that we could definitely tie that in with.
yeah, and I have questions on that too.
We get free for them, you know, whoever does the best gets 10%.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, again, there are a lot of options with this. We could change the categories. We could change the application if we need to have questions that better suit with these categories. It's a very flexible rubric, and it's very flexible in the way the committee could use it, whether it's a final commitment score or just a tool in helping the selection process. Again, the nice thing with this is it gives us that data to see if we used something like this, we could measure how did this work in the past versus what we've done historically.
So is this rubric, is this based on the application that we adjusted last season?
Yes, so the application that you used last season, these correspond with those questions. I believe the safe, inclusive, and welcoming section I did edit on the application, potentially just to see how that would look. Essentially to add that as a criteria. It's not something that currently is on there, but I think reflects the city's goals for our events really well. So that was something added to here that may need to be changed in the application.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that safe, inclusive, and welcoming would help with the Lake Fair situation. Just for instance, you know, that covers our end of the bargain, and making sure that, you know, we are we stand up when we stand behind our word. So I think that's really important. I do have one concern. I like the idea of having the new event or activity program on the rubric. I have concerns with us holding money from year to year and just putting that into, you know, if we don't have anybody show up this year, then we bank that money for next year. And what if we don't have anybody that shows up next year, we bank another, you know, and then we're gonna all of a sudden have this, you know, extra pot of money that we're just holding on to. So I think we should be, I think this rubric covers it very well, that they'll be weighted. If it is a new event, they'll have those extra, or they'll have those points in there. which will help us. But I think we've all been cognizant over at least the years that I've been on this committee, that we do make sure that we are awarding new events, because we do want to see that draw come in. And I think for the 4 years that I've been part of this, we have seen an increase of new people come in, and I think we have only not awarded one, and that's because the event wasn't in our jurisdiction and they couldn't pinpoint, heads in beds or using businesses in our community. So I think we've only turned down one new one, but I just want to throw caution to us about banking or holding on to extra money year after year. That's my only concern.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chad.
Had a problem with that, but yeah, good. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But I understand your concern though, definitely that, maybe we're not doing our best, putting our best foot forward, attracting more events here, but I just, I'm not trying to disagree with you or anything. I'm just saying, like, I'd rather have money in the bank and, as an option versus like a ton of events that we can't fund all of, and we're, like you just said, we didn't fund one because A, wasn't our area, and two, they didn't have a rubric or an exact number, how it's heads in bed, how it benefits the lodging community and the community itself. So I think we're doing pretty good, in my opinion.
I don't have necessarily a problem with banking any dollars, so long as that doesn't take us out of compliance. I would like to, get as many events in the city going as possible, but not, just spending for the sake of spending. Yeah, but if we have extra reserve dollars, and we're still in compliance, and we've tried to expend as much as we possibly can to get as many events as possible, I don't have a problem with, hanging on to a couple dollars until another funding cycle.
Seems like we've a lot of times gone into our reserves for one reason or another. So I think that I think we've been pretty prudent about spending the dollars we have. I don't know that right, Troy? I mean, don't we usually?
Typically we've budgeted for these reserves, but because of our conservative nature and projections for revenues, we haven't actually had used reserves that much. We've done it for very specific purposes.
Yeah.
Again,
Right.
matching those one-time projects and investments with reserves.
Mhm.
And it gives that flexibility to, or for an anticipated capital project that we need to have a little bit more funding behind it to still keep your current year funding for events going as well. So it kind of creates flexibility for the committee. If you can look at how those reserves are utilized for future expenditures.
Mhm.
So it looks like there's 130 points total, is that right?
Correct.
I guess the question before us appears to be, do we want to implement this year, or do we want to take a look at it and see how our applicants stack up in this situation over maybe a season, and implement it sometime in the future?
I personally would like to try this, and it doesn't mean that, and I think I heard this saying, it doesn't mean that if somebody got a bunch of points and somebody got none, that we're not gonna come to a medium, a consensus amongst us. But it's for us individually to start thinking about the process and how the applicants fit what we need in Lacey or what we want in Lacey. I feel like we need to do something, because I feel like there's been in the past a lot of inequities as far as funding, and just because they ask for $20,000 in their one-day event, we should give them 20,000. And versus somebody that's a 2-day event and asks for 10. That's just an example. So this would kind of help us think about that.
Gotcha.
And like I say, is just because if somebody scores really high doesn't necessarily, it gives us a talking point, right, as a committee.
Right. So I got one vote for immediate implementation.
I have before I give a vote, I have one clarifying question. So coming from the technology world, there's this lovely thing called discovery. So if we're switching to an online portion, is there technology that is assigned to us from the city, or are we signing into a portal to get our data? Or do we just review this data? I mean, I see all these lovely iPads that are in front of y'all. Or how does that technology piece work before I give my vote?
Yeah, great question. I am able to download all of the applications and save copies of them for discovery. So those would be able to be saved and documented. I could disperse them to the committee digitally via email. However, you guys wanted to review that, I could print them and put them in binders for you all, whichever is easiest, but they are able to be saved and
Okay,
documented and retained.
cool.
And that would be done internally through us. That wouldn't be through a third party.
Great. I think I'm a big fan of getting rid of the paper. I think 178 pages of paper is ridiculous. So my vote is to go ahead and implement this starting this year, as we've already talked about, and just have it available where we can log on or look at the port or however you want to send them out to us digitally.
Jen, do you have
Do you have
something?
something?
Mr. Carpenter, just a quick point of clarification, and everything that Sadie just said was correct, but I just want to also stress that you would not be keeping any local files.
Right.
This would be done on an internet cloud base that we would have access to and would retain all of those files. So there wouldn't be anything local that you yourself would be retaining.
Perfect. That would be my clarifying question. So I'm on board to move forward and get these electronically by signing into a portal or whatnot.
Mr. Shan?
I agree as well. Let's try this for a season. If you suggest it before and see how it goes. And just like the other gentleman just announced, maybe this is technology, and who knows if it's going to work or not, or nothing really goes to plan. So let's try it with the ability to edit in the future. If like this doesn't work out, we're allowed to like maybe switch around the questions, switch on the points a little bit, but yeah, I'm willing to give it a shot. Definitely.
Okay. Is that enough direction?
Or are there any questions too? This rubric are waiting of the scoring. You know, that's the other piece of feedback. Is that scoring weights in there as presented good, or is there something you want to?
Well, that was one of the reasons why I thought maybe, we could just kind of take a look at it for a minute and potentially make this decision in a follow-up meeting. But, here we are with a move it forward majority. So I kind of wanted to, I guess, the fact of the matter is, you can still take a look at this over the next 10, 20 days until our next meeting, just to kind of get a feel for the weight of the scores and potentially make adjustments or, have another discussion about what we see here. So
what's our timeline though? That's what I'm kind of thinking.
Yeah.
We're kind of.
Yeah, I will get to that at the end.
Oh.
Essentially, we have a 3-week time period to open the applications to the public to submit either electronically or via paper. And then that would allow 1 full week for the committee to review the applications independently and review those, and then come together the next week after that. We would then do any interviews or.
So when is the applications have to go out? I guess that's kind of because I don't think we have any time to change anything right now.
I think we
Do
have
we?
until September 1st, or is it August?
When do the applications get posted? It'll be posted Friday?
My recommendation would be to post them on Friday if the
Friday?
committee, yeah,
And I think they're due back here around the 1st of September, right?
yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, here
Wow,
we are.
that's-
Yeah. So I
That's
don't think
quick.
we have a whole lot of time.
And I think that would be a great, because we don't have a lot of time, it would be nice to be digital, because I know a lot of people do the manual typing and that's a pain in the butt when they can just log on and just do it right there. Sadie, on your system, is there a save and continue for later? So I know that we have an event form that we do at the Washington Center that is not necessarily as cumbersome as all of the questions that we ask in LTAC. And I'm wondering if there is an opportunity for, let's say, somebody like the Washington Center that's midway through their application, and then you know, they have to walk away. Is there a save now? Is there a save feature where they can come back to it, or do they just have one shot and they're done?
Unfortunately, we don't have the option for a save feature with the system that we have
Okay.
right now. We can
Okay.
make questions available on a PDF ahead of time so that applicants could pre-fill at their own pace and then translate that to the online application. So that would be the workaround, is to provide it in that PDF format so that they can work on the application at their ease and then just submit online all at once when they're ready. The nice thing is they also typically, for the uploads and the supplemental information, are having to print that out in multiple copies to provide for consideration. Now they only have to upload that once through that.
Right. And not to mention that something Ruth and I caught on last year, or we've seen this a couple of years in a row, is that people have cut and pasted their answers from year to year. So chances are they've already saved these documents somewhere, so they can just cut and paste their answers. Not that we want them to cut and paste, we want them to be original year after year, but we did catch on to that a couple times. So I guess it's not the end of the world if they have a one-shot deal, because they probably already have their application from years past where they're going to be like, oh, that question didn't change, here's my answer. So
And the
I guess that's,
application
yeah.
have a feature that you can request a copy of your answers at the end. So if Troy filled out an application, he could select and get an email copy of his application sent to him in addition to sending it for submission. So they will be able to retain copies if they want to.
So let's say, for example, a new applicant who is not aware of all the things that they need to upload in order to, for this application to be 100% complete. And, you know, if they leave this browser window open, is it going to time them out if they don't respond in a period of time?
I believe, yes, it does. What time it
Start
kicks you out? Yes, I'm not sure. And that's something that we could also add language on, as well as that application may time out, does not save, any of that language. We could add to make it more user friendly, absolutely.
Or maybe some type of a, for lack of a better word, a syllabus or some list of documentations that you're going to need before you get started with this application and find that you have to go get it from your work
Right.
computer or whatever.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. And that information is currently at the bottom before you submit. There is a list of make sure you have attached A, B, and C, but that language could be added in multiple places to make it very transparent before they start.
Before they started.
Before they start, yeah, because we're
That's
trying to
good.
promote and
Right.
new people to show up, but if this could be a deterrent if they get started and have to start.
Dang, I have to start all over again. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. Yeah.
So in this case, I definitely like a scoring rubric because, you know, we all came back from reviewing applications and, you know, had different vibes about, you know, what we saw. And so I think a scoring rubric would help us kind of streamline and really kind of definitively say, you know, I feel this way because this and so on. I haven't had a chance to really look at it and absorb it, you know, so I'm not 100% comfortable with saying, let's just run with it. But you guys are, and that gives me a little bit of confidence in just saying, hey, let's run with it. But over these next 3 weeks before we actually get started, I'm gonna take some time with it just to see if I feel like any adjustments need to be made. You know, I just want to get comfortable with it before we say this is the way that's going to work best for us.
But the application will already go out, but then we'll discuss this, in more in depth.
And Malcolm,
Yeah, go ahead.
if it makes you feel any better, we've kind of done, without the rubric, we've kind of done the same thing in the past where we've all taken away the data and looked at it. This just gives us some benchmarks so then we can identify where we're coming from. So I actually think this is actually going to better serve us in the long term, because like when we had the binders, you know, and we would tab with Post-it notes or whatever, look at this on this page for this application, and then we'd stop and talk about it. I think this actually just gives us more of an idea to stay on the same page. So I think this will help us in the long run be a little bit stronger and more cohesive as a team.
And I can 100%, I can agree with that. again, I've only had it for 20 minutes. So I just kind of wanted to absorb it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I respect that.
And also too, we made it in the policy that this is not a final determinant. It's just like a discussion piece. So it's not binding with the outcome, but that gives the flexibility also as you go through this process and experience it. Then you can look at, well, how do we weight these, in the future, and make some modifications, how to weight and score, what other questions should be there.
We're not, yeah, it's not gonna be, the concrete isn't gonna dry on it. We just want to,
No.
yeah.
Yep.
Any more questions regarding the rubric that I can answer, clarify? The next piece that kind of corresponds with the scoring rubric was supplemental interviews. Historically, the city has requested that some applicants give interviews or presentations about their event to gather more information. I talked to other cities and they also did do some presentation requirements. What I found was that the cities who did also used a scoring rubric to kind of help them gauge who may or may not use a presentation or require a presentation. Currently, we do presentations kind of on a case-by-case basis at the discretion of the committee. So my recommendation would be to go forward with continuing supplemental presentations contingent on scoring. And what I mean by that would be to have the committee implement kind of a gauge on the scorecard of a score. X points or below maybe requires a presentation to get more information and decide if it's a good fit. Things like that, so that you're not having to do a presentation for every single application, especially some of those historic events that you already have information about. So you would potentially use the scoring rubric to determine who you would want to see a presentation from, which is a very flexible limit. You could do it for everyone based on a score. You could do scores on below a certain point, or maybe scores above a certain point that you want to hear more about, just to help determine if you feel that you need to do a presentation at all.
So if you go by a scoring sheet, I don't know how that would work. Because they're high or low. I mean, you stop and look at, we give X amount, 200 and some $1,000 to marketing, but how do we know from an application if we're getting our dollars worth for that, or what they've done in the past year?
That is,
So I'm having to think about that one.
Shannon,
So just for a quick point of clarification, the scoring rubric is specifically for events, not
Yes.
necessarily
Oh,
for operating.
oh, Oh, okay.
yes, thank
Oh,
you for
okay.
that, Shannon. So
Okay.
this, yes,
I
to
got it,
clarify,
I
is
got it.
just for those events that are
Okay.
requesting funding. So again, with the presentations
Yeah.
requesting funding, say that you scored them and scores 30 or below have to give a presentation, just as an example. You could then take all of your scoring rubrics and only request events that scored really low to maybe get more information to see if they're a good fit for funding or not, which could cut down on the number of presentations, or depending on the threshold, it could increase the number of presentations, but they would all be within that consistent realm.
I would almost require any new events to do a presentation because they're new. And
so go ahead, Chad.
I was gonna say, I agree with Andrew, and I'm wondering, Sadie, is there a recommendation, or could you come up with a suggestion or a recommendation for what you would say would be based on the information that you have, is there a requirement for, you would ask those people they scored below a certain number to come in for a presentation? Because I agree with Andrew. I think if it's a new event, we need to know about them. We need to learn about them. But then I think if you could help us determine or make a suggestion as to, based on your research, what would help us set those numbers, I think that would be beneficial to us.
Yeah, that is a great point, Chad. And I know the cities that I did speak with had scores that changed throughout the years. If they used a point range, say 30 to 50 points, and some years they found that that was too many applicants, they didn't use that to do presentations and then just required everyone to do presentations. It was really all over the board in my discussions with the cities. So unfortunately, I don't have a threshold recommendation for that. One option too would be to use the criteria that we have this year on the applications and kind of review at the end of the year how a lot of them scored and set that threshold maybe for next year.
Okay.
Using some of that data because we would have the ability to track that data now with the scorecard. But unfortunately, that wasn't a lot of information that the cities I spoke with gave or that was very beneficial. And I think that it just changed for them a lot.
So are you suggesting that after the event, we come back to that, and we score them based on some rubric and then kind of give them our own score?
Can you clarify what do you mean by after the
So
event?
basically I'm sorry, this rubric's for us, not for them.
Yeah.
Apologize.
No, you're
I
fine.
thought they get one of these too, and they're like, yeah, you want
No, this is just for our internal processing to help the application and the process. No, not a problem at all, but that is the nice thing.
Maybe even like recess our own decisions.
Mhm.
Give a rubric, like, hey, they, like you said, Lake Fair, whatever, not, Lake Fair, they want to include for say, you know, can come back and kind of adjust that a little bit and use that as our own kind of, you know, touchstone for next year, next time deciding.
So in the past, we've had people come in because there was something vague or ambiguous that we saw in their application, something undefined, something that we, you know, and part of when they came in, you know, it was nice to put a face with an application, and it was, I think, also beneficial for them to, you know, put a face with an application, right? And so in some cases, we've peeled back layers and found that the supporting structure for an entity was not what we thought it was, or something along those lines. And so, you know, I think part of the ask to be in person and do kind of an interview, kind of a situation was, you know, such a committee discretion because, you know, we felt something wasn't right or whatever the case may be. I don't know
Or
if.
wanted more information, yeah.
Yep.
And that may not show up on a rubric.
Exactly my point. So I don't know how well a rubric is going to, you know, suggest or say how we interpret the application in terms of whether we want to see those people or not. So I like this, you know, the thought and idea that a certain score would exempt you from a presentation. But at the same time, I view it as quasi risky. If this is a credit score, that makes us underwriters, right?
If I can interject, you know, one of the things that you don't have to determine on a case-by-case basis presentations by the rubric. You can look at new events and or, you know, as you just said, and you can have that on that first review, who are the ones you'd like to hear more from. We can put that information on the applications that you may be called to have prepare a presentation after the first review by the committee. So it's kind of open-ended, but that way you have the ability to, you know, well, even like, you know, say the Lake Fair, you have a little more conversation of what they've done since the, you know, the previous year's issues have come up.
Yeah.
So there's ways you can do that, that has the discretion of the committee to invite people in for presentations, but it's just not automatic. Everybody does, so they can work with your time and efficiencies.
Right.
So I would kind of suggest we not use it this year for whether we bring them in to present or not.
Gotcha.
I can get behind that.
I kind of think that maybe we should just see where these people, we don't know where they're gonna land at all. But yet there's some of them, like you say, we don't know a lot about. Come in and talk to us about your organization. That wouldn't show up on it.
Right.
Right, but that's still required presentations on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
So it'll still be a case by case. I don't know if I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know if a rubric score should determine whether we want to see them or
I
not.
don't agree with that.
Okay.
Those be, instead of determined by the rubric, it'd be determined by the community.
Yeah.
Very good. That's better.
And I think most of these people, I mean, yes, we have gotten new people. I was gonna make a really bad generalization, so I'll rephrase it. A lot of folks in the past have been prepared for a presentation year after year. So I think they are most accustomed to that. And I think we can do a really good job of when we receive applications that we could maybe potentially send out a, thank you, we received your application. The committee may, kind of paint that photo of their next steps. So then they're not shocked if we invite them in. So that might be something that we look at as a process just to automatically do. So then that way they're not caught off guard. But like the Washington Center, I'll speak to that. We're used to coming in, the VCB, they're used to coming in. So there are a lot of groups that are used to coming in and just saying, hi, this is what's going on, here's the new stuff. So I think year after year, a lot of these folks just, they know that that's part of the process. So, and I think communication is always good. We can always, communicate to folks and let them know what the expectations are.
Okay, well,
There's more. Sorry. So the next thing I reviewed, and you guys touched a little bit on already, were funding priorities. So I found researching and talking to other cities that every other city has some sort of funding priority. It varied city to city, but essentially they had allocations. As you can see here, everybody almost had something for marketing. So they contribute X amount of dollars toward marketing. Some had specific outlines for capital projects. Nobody had anything for new events that I discussed, but across the board, they had some sort of funding priority or strategy going forward. Here's some examples, and this one's going to be so small, I apologize, where you can see different types of things the city of Chelan has set aside funding automatically for Lakeside Park every year. Fife does their DACA, hopefully I said that right, park to do restrooms. And then Moses Lake does their Parks Department funding for lighting projects and things like this. So you can kind of see just how different organizations prioritize their funding for different types of projects. And then
Maintenance administration, how does that fit into lodging tax?
Where's that?
How does, well, never mind. Some of those were pretty questionable. For
No, go ahead.
Lodging tax dollars for.
oh, in terms of restrooms and
Yeah.
for capital projects and
Projects.
things. And there's a variety all over the board, as you saw, that
Yeah.
cities use it for,
all fields are capital.
yeah, a lot of.
Oh, yeah, those bring people in. Yeah, but
We get the rec, we're already allocating funds for that too, for the new turf and everything. I mean, we are in a way kind of doing this in a way, aren't we?
Yeah, to an
To an
extent.
extent, yes, but so like, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I'm just pretty much.
Oh, okay, I kept seeing this in the corner of my eye. That's all good. So, what exactly are you suggesting here then? Like, are you suggesting that we kind of allocate more funds to more community
So-
projects? I mean,
Based on what other cities are doing, I think it could be beneficial for us to do some proposed budget priorities, not necessarily a hard limit that all 60% must be on capital projects, but that our goal is to allocate 60% of these revenues towards capital projects, towards marketing, towards our event funding programs, just to kind of capture what we've been doing in the past and help organize moving forward on really how we want to distribute these funds. Currently within that operations and capital projects, that does capture the RAC project that we do and the museum funding that we do with the city. So those are two of our really big high dollar things that we fund, which is why that is reflected in.
in the operations and capital projects. So, yeah.
Mhm.
So what is, are we currently spending on marketing and what are we currently spending on events? So, to me, well, let's see. And then so out of that 300,000, we have the rack and the museum, which is about 250, I guess. Is that right?
30.
280? Okay.
I think it kind of-
149.
Yeah, how do you categorize them? And so my question is, 100,000 on events is pretty low, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what we spent last year, so. And I
Did you run the
couldn't
list?
see well enough to.
I think the city might have some information.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I did a quick estimate
Okay.
right before this, and so for 2022, we spent, and again, this is an estimate, so
Yeah.
there may be some variables, roughly 22% of our budget at $117,000 on the grants last year,
On which?
on the grants.
The events activity.
Yes, excuse me, yes, thank you,
117,
yes.
okay.
And then looking at these operation and capital projects, it's estimated that there was about 42% of the budget spent on that, with roughly 228,000. And then the remaining 40% of the budget went toward marketing at roughly 217, excuse me, $1,000.
Yeah, so that's what I kind of, because if we don't have events or places to go to have these events, what is 40% of our budget gonna market?
Hmm.
I mean, that's a lot of money for market.
And each city that I spoke to did it a little differently. They did their marketing differently, but the big thing was capital projects and marketing for them specifically, and having either a percentage goal or a dollar goal to designate to those allocations, one way or another.
Yeah. ooh. So
So
we spent 45% on marketing.
roughly,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
Well, I mean, historically, for some perspective on the marketing, prior to the 2013 legislative change, 100% of the lodging tax dollars had to go to promotion and marketing. You couldn't put
Yeah,
money into operations, so that's probably kind of historically how we got there and why that's so high, and we just
No,
not
no,
going down there.
I know, I get it, but it just seems like I knew it was, I never calculated it out to figure it out how much, but I knew between the Visitor and Convention Bureau or Experience Olympia
Mhm.
and Chamber, we're spending a lot of money.
mhm.
Between those three entities,
But you have to have something to market, right?
yeah. Got our own Lacey Page on VCB.
I know.
Which
Took
I
us a
think
while to get
goes
there.
back to, the city's presenting to us some information going into this year, so we're looking at those numbers and adjusting them a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, so just recommending that we do some sort of funding priority. There's a lot of room to adjust those, that my recommendation would be to reevaluate those yearly with
Okay.
assistance from finance, and kind of just a review of what we're actually spending our money on, how we're allocating it. We do have things like the rack that are big commitments. So we want to make sure that in addition to those commitments, we're still able to fund other capital projects if they were to come up, or other operational things if they were to come up. And then also being mindful of how much money we are giving to our event activity and program grants and things like that. So the nice thing about that too is that these don't necessarily have to be concrete. If for some reason there were not a lot of events or activities and we had some overflow, that could go toward marketing, that could go into reserves. So depending on how the committee chose to implement that and how strict to be, there is some room for rollover or to put in reserves.
So on the end of this, did we have columns that say what we spent on each one of these categories? You know, or what percent it is in 22 and 23?
we're currently at.
Yeah, we could get some more
Could you?
information.
Yeah,
Uh,
sorry, guys, I have a hard time with the marketing being the same percentage as events, activities and programs. And I know these are just recommendations, but marketing is just that is, you're basically putting a pile of money and lighting it on fire because nobody can really predict marketing. But, with events, there's things being put on. Maybe I need to know what context these were coming from. Maybe am I alone in this? That weight is the same?
Well, events, activities and programs is our goal.
Correct, because is what drives people into the community.
Well, and I think it's important to remember too, the lodging tax revenues are intended to increase tourism in Lacey to get those heads in beds. There are multiple ways that we can do that. Part of it is through our capital projects. The rack is a huge entertainment point for the city that's got huge financial contributions to it because it brings in the most events that bring the most heads to beds, which is really the goal in attracting tourism greater than 50 miles or more. Same with marketing. Depending on what it's marketing, it might not seem valuable, but is it getting City of Lacey events out to people in a span greater than 50 miles or more? Because that's really where we start to see those overnight stays. That's where we start to generate those lodging tax revenues and able to give it back to these events. So we may not see an immediate upfront value with everything, but is it overall contributing to that attraction to Lacey, giving people access to see things online by finding out about events, and then they go to look for other events. So there's definitely a lot of ways to look at it. Our goal here at the end of the day, though, is to really attract those people from out of town. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that and a lot of ways that we could fund that.
I guess, Sadie, to bring more clarity to what I was thinking is, I know from an event standpoint, we send out a survey after every one of our Washington Center shows. Did you stop? Did you eat? Did you drink? Did you stay the night? We have that data. So for me, having concrete, I know that there were 1,000 people in the building for this event, and that 35% of those people stayed or stopped or bought gas or had dinner in Lacey. That's more concrete than marketing, which is just, here's my piece of marketing that went out. So I feel like event activities and programs would have a higher weight than marketing. So like, that's where I don't see those as both the same value or same weight.
Yeah, and when you stop and think about all those events, do a lot of their own marketing, right?
Yeah, it's built into their overall budget.
I do want to, reemphasize what Sadie mentioned too, though, is you have the events, they do their own marketing, but what gets it out there to the further out, casting out the 50+ mile radius, make people aware that we have these facilities, we have these events going on. So I don't want to understate the value of some of that marketing, but that's where it kind of goes through the application process, looking at what are those tools, what's the value of that marketing proposal from whichever applicant submits.
So has a person that did Fun Fair for so many years, I don't even want to think about it, but we sent out PSAs to all, different radio stations, TV stations. We did a lot of that ourselves. So, and I question whether some of those people do that for our events. I mean, do they send it further north? Do they send it further south? Or, down to the harbor or whatever? I personally did that myself.
Well, then somebody made an application for marketing dollars that they should probably be looking at and showing how are they going to, what's their techniques they're going to use, what's their audience reach, and then also have those performance measures, how they correlate that marketing to bringing people here.
Right.
And that's a metric I think that's a very fair question to ask, and also to expect in terms of reporting after the fact too, to make sure that those dollars were going for that for the future year funding cycles.
Right. That's why I was thinking more marketing 15%, events, activities, and programming 25%. That's kind of where my head was leaning, allocating wise.
Well, allocating more funds to events, activities, and programs is my call too as well. So I'm in agreement, but I don't, we don't know the details of everything, how exactly the dollars are spent in marketing and capital projects exactly, so. Until we see that, I don't think we can really, make a good judgment on this. But I see the lopsidedness of it, because I agree with you, events, activities and programs are what brings the dollars and the heads and beds. From what we can see exactly, so until we see everything, I don't think we can really make a concrete
And
decision.
yeah, and as somebody that just finished a capital project, I just finished one in November. It's a lot of hard work and choosing and justifying the dollars that go into it and getting little ROI. It's hard, it's difficult, but I do agree that we do have to be that, we have to set aside the reserves. I'm not in argument about, the turf or the synthetic replacements. I think that's really important because we need to have a budget to be able to replace fields, or we're gonna stop. We're gonna not be that world-class facility. We're not gonna have a world-class facility here if we don't have ways to keep it going. We can build wonderful, amazing things, but if we don't have a money to make sure that we're reinvesting in these buildings, then or these facilities, then they just become, second rate. So I totally understand the value of the dollar amounts. I just want to make sure that there's heavier weight on programming, because programming is really important. So get more fun fairs. Yay.
So it sounds as if the suggestion here is that we set these benchmarks or set some benchmarks for capital marketing and events, activities and programs. Before we do that, maybe we can take a look at the historical data and see where we've been in previous years in terms of these benchmarks, so that we can make a better decision on where we should set these numbers at. I know, marketing is one of those tricky things because, the expectation of the return on marketing is usually what, 1 to 5% on different types of, print and social media, and these types of things. I think in order for us to, and if these numbers are based on the history of what we've done, thank you for digging in and finding that information. But maybe we should give some greater consideration to what these benchmarks should actually be. And we can come up with a decision on that. I'm not trying to take everything that we've got, all this information and push it out. It just kind of seems like a lot of information at once. And I want to make sure that this committee has time to consider, all of this, because I typically, we may get 1 or 2 of these things a year and look at them, but in this season, we're getting them all at once. Right. And
Is
so
it too much for my brain?
no, it's not too much for anybody's brain. I know we all have great mental capacity. However, I do want people to get, some time to consider some of these options. I'm all for some of the things that we're doing here in this meeting. But there's some of the things that I want to give the committee, at least some time on before we say, okay, let's
But I
run
think
with
this
that.
is a good eye opener for us.
Yeah.
Definitely good eye opener and to look back on some history too.
So again, these are all, really good suggestions.
Yeah.
And most likely things that we probably should have implemented already, but as we meet, for what, 2 quarters of the year, somewhere in that ballpark. I don't want to make all these changes at once. That's not the right way to say this. I'm for making these changes. I just want to make sure that this committee has time to consider the information, and not ask everybody to make, these decisions all in one sitting.
I
Excellent.
think too, just make sure that it's clear for me or us. So going forward, we're not going to really set on a funding allocation priority policy, but we're just going to go through this year, monitor it, and then maybe when we meet back in mid-year or in February, we can kind of take a little deeper dive and looking at that and set it up for the following year.
Sure.
What that really looks like. And That way we can start tracking this information as you go into this year's process, look at the applications, their merits, and continue on going into next year for revisiting this topic.
Absolutely.
The next thing I did was looked with the cities I talked to see if they had any published policies or procedures for their lodging tax committee. As you can see, not many of them did at all. Some of them stated that they felt that their rubric was enough consistency and policy for them, so they didn't feel the need to do a formal published policy or procedure. My recommendation would be to implement some sort of policy for the lodging tax administration at the city, just to create that clear and transparent process of what we're doing, how we're coming to decisions, and what our goals are. That would also, I think, really help with some consistency, especially in the realm of funding for events and doing things like implementing a rubric to help kind of cover our bases there. And then having this policy would also kind of help reinforce all of these changes we've discussed today, right? Some we've elected to do, like online applications, scoring rubrics, things like that could just really be reinforced through a policy. So that would be my recommendation, to look at that. I have a brief overview, which you will all see in your copies that I handed out, have been amended from what has been posted in Civic Clerk. Maybe. So sorry about that.
So your amended policies would be in the local file, not on Civic Clerk. Those were changes that have since been made.
I don't have that local file, unfortunately. So I apologize for that. The amended one is not in here. This is a rough edit of the one that was originally in there that really just outlines the mission statement and the goal of the lodging tax committee, outlining what we are, how we get our funding, also that we operate in conjunction with the RCWs that implement and outline lodging tax. And then in here, there are just some brief roles and responsibilities about what our lodging tax committee does, who's eligible to serve on this committee, the length of the terms, and some basic housekeeping around that. You'll notice under here, funding priorities, which were removed in the amended one, could go out in here, as well as the program administration, kind of how the committee serves, what we do internally as far as processing the applications to provide them to you as the committee, how we post them and things like that. Having outlined the application information, so having that policy that says we don't accept late applications, for example. If it comes past the due date, it's not into consideration. Having that kind of in a policy just reinforces our action in the event that we do have to deny a late application, and we would be able to turn around and reference a policy. Also having a
Is
policy.
that different than has that been updated or something from what I printed out?
Yes, this has been. I apologize. The wrong version is in here.
Okay.
So then there's language about using a scoring rubric and language that includes using that as a guide, but not a final determination, as well as copies of the rubrics in here, for example, and then language about how we decide to implement our supplemental presentations, whether we choose to do that on a case-by-case basis or not. So that's a brief overview of kind of how that would look and be laid out, just to have that again to reference back and look at.
Okay, so it would be, policy would be, it would show our mission statement, funding, roles, responsibilities, and we would make this outward facing.
Yes,
It's the belief that this will help with transparency and people to get a full understanding of the how and the why and so on.
exactly. What the goal here is for, how we elect and choose who we give funding to, what the rules around applying for funding are, such as due dates, how to apply, and just make that really transparent to applicants and other interested parties, even on how we're kind of running our program and what the rules around it are.
It looks like from the cities that you survey, we would be the first to do this.
We would be the first one to have a formal policy.
So is there any way we can review this? Because this is more than what I had originally
Absolutely.
printed out, and then maybe take it up at our next meeting.
I would like to I'd like to make a recommendation that we maybe table this for an off season. I know that Sadie, you've done a lot of the legwork, which is great. I commend you for that. But maybe when we're not faced with the 35 applicants that we are about ready to get faced in the next month, that maybe that this is a summertime, or maybe this is a quarter 3, quarter 4 type of project that we all meet and do.
I am all in favor of the transparency and letting people know what we do, why we do it, or the expectations, all the different pieces that come into play for them to apply. I completely think that this is going to pass this committee. I would also like to see it off season because we are going to, if we do it now, it's just going to increase the number of meetings that we need to have this year. And we already have priorities for those meetings. Yeah, I would like to see this happen.
Plus, there might be a few changes when we go through some of this.
How did
Next
it
month.
do about having something like this?
They call Nicole.
Yeah.
They used to call Nicole.
Yeah. They typically call and ask questions.
Having something like this would probably be very beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I just want to clarify that we do have information on the LTAC program available on our website, so people can get a general understanding of what LTAC is and certainly what our deadlines are and what our projected dates that you're about to go through. But also we have more information in our municipal code as well as our various policy handbooks on just what LTAC as a committee is.
Awesome. With that, maybe we can just put a blurb that the LTAC committee will be reviewing procedures. A processor. I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on TV. But if they, state something that we will be evaluating this in our off season to really bring clarity and, as Malcolm said, transparency to the committee or to the community. So I think that's important as well.
Absolutely, great point. The last thing I have is kind of just the proposed timeline for this year. As Rick mentioned, we're really not that far behind from the schedule that we had last year. The only substantial change is the application window is about a week and a half shorter. As far as everything else goes, though, we're doing pretty good for being on schedule. So we've had our meeting today. My recommendation would be to post the applications out this Friday, including, it sounds like, turning on the online application option with the notice of change upcoming. So that I would propose doing that by Friday. And then next week we could have the press release done and all of that information out. September 1st, continue with that deadline for the applications. And that sounds like including paper applications as well. So that would be a September 1st postmark date for any of those at this time. The week of September 4th would be the week that you as a committee would have time to review the applications and apply the scoring rubric and kind of independently score and get your feel for the applications. And then that following week, I would recommend that we meet and go over the applications as a whole and then elect which applications should come in for supplemental presentations. Do the presentations the following week if possible, and then after that week, once we had the presentations and the scores, we would ideally know who the awarded recipients would be and get those notices out in time to make the budget cycle still. The one change on there is that I would recommend we do a February kind of a recap meeting, kind of go over things like how did all of the funding and the events through the end of the year go? And then also maybe revisit some of these options like a policy and have more time to look into that and maybe say what worked on the applications and the scoring and what didn't, and get a head start on changing those for the next year. So it's not quite the time crunch that it seems to be when it comes to getting these out and meeting.
Has the 18th, is that, to me seems early, but I can't remember when it has to go to the council.
Ooh, I can't either.
We have,
We'll be able to speak to, because it's going to tie into the budgetary process, and we're going to have it finished for final budget preparation.
So we have our main budget presentation of the council scheduled for October 19th.
Mhm.
We have to have our document done the week before that, so our document is,
So it's about a month out. before.
yeah, I mean, really the very latest that the numbers need to stop moving is probably, it's definitely that last week of September, probably closer to the front end than the back end of that business week, so. As we know, we need time to put the document together, to review, to send it to the printer, to get it put together, and then to distribute to the public and the council, so.
There's a little bit we could, I mean, because the presentations and the final rewards, yeah.
yeah, and I had kind of set it up, so in the event that we do need to go out one more week, that we could push things out a week and still have that kind of room that we could get everything to finance budgetarily that we need in time.
Yeah.
So we do have about a week worth of wiggle room if needed.
Okay.
So we have those. And then with that,
Can you, I didn't see that.
It wasn't in the packet, but.
It was in the packet. Could you send it to us?
yes, absolutely, I will
Okay,
send that
just so we
out.
kind of have that. Mhm.
And then the
Great.
last thing, maybe internet. That I had was, does everybody have their mobile phone with them?
Mhm.
I was going to, if we had a couple minutes, I pre-booked some times for meetings and was gonna have everybody log in and kind of vote which meeting times for our next 2 meetings would be best, so we could have that planned ahead of time now. So let me know if you're able to scan that before I move on.
See,
And then Chad, are you able to do that from home virtually? Is it scanning okay on your phone?
I have a lodging tax advisory committee schedule, and then there gives me a thumbs up, but it doesn't really go anywhere. It just says menti.com.
Okay, yeah, you won't be able to go to the next page until I get you there. So as long as you're seeing that home page and our LinkedIn,
Yes.
perfect, everybody got that?
mhm.
So.
Need some help scanning it,
Yeah,
Ruth.
try.
It might be too far away from you.
Mine's too far.
Okay, you can go, if you go to menti.com, I have a code for you if it's not
Okay.
scanning correctly.
Oh, good. Thank you, Troy.
And then click on that, yeah. Technology, so good, but so tricky at times.
Yeah, you need a 5-year-old to do it for you.
I know.
100%.
No, I do.
Oh, thank you, Troy. I'm forever indebted to you.
Perfect, everybody have access to that?
Mhm.
So the first one that we'll be looking to schedule is the application review that week of September 11th. So these are kind of the 3 time slots that we had proposed, and I was hoping whichever may work for you all to kind of select ahead of time and get it on our schedules.
I feel like I'm taking a test.
I know, right? You didn't know you would all be getting a pop quiz on your calendars.
Ooh, that was me, 913. Ooh,
It's kind of exciting to see your answers.
This is like Cahoots or whatever. We did this in Leadership Thurston County. It's all interactive and live.
Be a little bit better.
Actually, I'm probably pretty flexible on all those times.
Not Friday, you said? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. And I will have Nicole follow up with an email and just confirm these times and dates with you all, so you have that. But just trying to get scheduled ahead because I know everybody is very busy. Did everyone have a chance to respond to this one? Perfect. The next one is just going to be for those supplemental presentations the week of the 18th. So these are a bit longer of time slots because we don't know how many applications or presentations we'll have yet. So again, there's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Sounds like Andrew, Friday moving forward is not the best day.
Just that particular.
Okay.
No pressure.
That's my whatever I was supposed to be doing.
On the web.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. You just go ahead.
Do you
and
know-
I'll work. whatever.
Okay, perfect. And like I mentioned, we'll reconfirm with everybody, but it looks like our next two meetings will be in conjunction with that timeline on those Wednesdays. And then at the end of the year, we can discuss if a February meeting works well time-wise for everybody, or later in Q1 to do a recap and revisit some more detailed information. Excellent. Well, that is all I had. Those are very easy to get scheduled when it's all digital. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, this is good.
Okay, well, so it looks like we have agreed that we will be using a scoring rubric and we will be doing online applications with this year being our final paper year. And it also looks as if we have bought ourselves a little bit of time in terms of our outward facing policy, which we do want to, publish and make available to the public. And also bought a little bit of a time with our budgetary benchmarks. And I just, want to say in buying that time, as long as it doesn't conflict with the city accountant's office, that we bought ourselves some time on that issue. So if you're okay with it, then we're good. Okay, so then if nobody has anything more, then it looks like we have reached the end of our agenda. And if it's all right with everybody here, I will call this meeting adjourned.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Lots of information.
Yeah,
You're moving forward.
Katie, you brought us more than we've seen in a long time.
You're welcome.